Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of our 12 days of Copilot. Today, we're going to cover systems ready to shine, how to get your systems, people, and processes Copilot ready for smarter insights and stronger performance. Some of the housekeeping I want to tackle just really quickly here. Remember, for every person that joins these 12 days at Copilot, we are donating $5 to TechFluence, who empowers individuals by providing training, mentorship, and pathways into technology careers. If you haven't heard of them, look them up. I've worked with them in the past. They're a great organization and they're a real big part, obviously, of the Dynamics community. Now, with that, let's go ahead and introduce who our speaker is going to be today. So you don't have to put up with me. Instead, Mr. Tyler Allard, our solutions architect here, is going to go through more of the infrastructure perspective when it comes to Copilot and some of the really cool features around it. And with that, Mr. Tyler, let's unwrap today's Copilot tip.
Hey, thank you very much, Scott. Just waiting for my share to come up here. But as we're thinking about how Copilot interacts with your systems and your people and your processes and how to get them ready for Copilot, first thing we all want to make sure we get is how Copilot is really interacting with your systems and your people using those systems. So to summarize really quickly here, when a user interacts with Copilot and sends a prompt to Copilot through one of the multiple applications through which Copilot is available, first that prompt lands with Copilot and then it starts a process called grounding. And this is how Copilot is interacting with your systems to contextualize the prompt that your users are sending it. It's using the Graph API to access any user accessible data in your cloud environment to create context for that prompt, leverage files or data that they have access to, and then it encapsulates that and sends it to the large language model or LLM, all within the Microsoft service boundary. So what that means is that it's not leaving the Microsoft environment. It's not really leaving your M365 environment. Your data stays at rest there. It just adds some additional context for the prompt, sends it to the model, and then you can see step 4, it sends it back to the user on whatever platform they're using Copilot. So a couple key things here to understand with how Copilot interacts with your systems is that everything stays in the Microsoft service boundary, nothing is leaving, and that also means that none of your data is being used to train this large language model. But what it also means is that the data that you make available to Copilot is very important in the quality of the responses that you're going to get. If you have legacy data in SharePoint or emails going back 10, 15 years available in user mailboxes and Copilot is leveraging that data, that's going to impact the response and you might not get the most pertinent or relevant information in the response that you're getting. So in order to keep your systems as ready as possible for Copilot and ensure a good end user experience, you're going to want to make sure that all of the data that you're expecting Copilot to use is not only in the cloud, but it's the relevant data that's in the cloud. Now, to help ensure that all of the data that you need to leverage with Copilot is available, as I mentioned before, it leverages the M365 Graph API. Now, when it comes to the M365 apps or any other biz apps in the Microsoft Cloud or Microsoft Sphere, makes it really easy. The Graph API is built into everything. But if you have third-party tools that you're leveraging, anything from Jira, Atlassian that you want to leverage for Copilot prompts, or be using with agents, you need to make sure that that data is made available to Copilot. And that's through app registrations or other third-party solutions to integrate that data and make it available to your Microsoft cloud. If that data is not visible by the cloud, it's not going to be visible to Copilot. That includes any on-prem legacy shares, any local data on a user's workstation, for example. You really need to make sure if you want your system to be Copilot friendly, that Copilot can see the data that you want it to use. Now, the other key part about security when using Copilot is that Copilot only has access to the data that the user initiating the Copilot action has access to. It's using the same permission set as the user that is leveraging Copilot. The name Copilot is very intentional. You yourself, the user, are the pilot, Copilot is there to help you out. In a cloud environment, how do we ensure that you are who you say you are? With identity-based access controls. So starting with the identity-based part of that, how do we ensure that you are who you say you are with multi-factor authentication? If you've used multi-factor authentication before on a bank account, or perhaps it's already been pushed automatically to your M365 tenant by Microsoft, you know what that is already, but it's essentially using a separate factor like your phone or a phone number or an authenticator app to ensure that you are who you say you are when you're signing in. And then conditional access is something that you might not have used before, but that's the access controls piece where we're getting additional insight and control over what type of data users in your environment can access. And we can actually leverage things like where they're signing in from, what type of device they're signing in on, to ensure that the data is available for them when they're using Copilot, or perhaps not if they're using a platform that you don't want them to be using. As far as getting your people ready for Copilot, this is going to be the largest change around having that cloud data available. You need to ensure that you have identity-based access controls in place to ensure that you're not creating additional barriers for Copilot. And then when it comes to the processes, to manage these security controls, there's a litany of tools available from Microsoft. The absolute base level would be that multi-factor authentication platform. And then, as I mentioned, the next step up would be conditional access. But what might be the most important from a process perspective is the user session risk and access control. How do we get insight into how your users are accessing Copilot, how often they're using Copilot, and how can we ensure that going forward, if we get to a state where the agentic AI is not fully autonomous, but eventually becomes fully autonomous, when you have a separate set of credentials for Copilot in the not so distant future, how are you going to have access into what it's doing in your environment, knowing that it's not driven by a specific user? So jumping in to the M365 Admin Center, I'll show you a couple quick places that you can check. Of course, the first one is going to be within the Copilot Admin Center itself. If you jump into the overview here, you'll see that you'll get a very high-level summary of who's licensed for Copilot, what platforms the Copilot functionality is available in, and the active users that are actually using it in those environments. But if you click on Learn More and Usage to go to the Reportings tab, you can see that Copilot here in your environment will be broken down by different technology. So Copilot Search, Copilot Chat, or M365 Copilot built into the other applications. And in this dashboard, not only do you get an adoption summary, but you also get a user breakdown by prompt and usage details by user. You can see here that we have our identities hash for security and our demo tenant. But in your environment, you can set your reporting to actually give you individual usernames and display names so you can monitor who's using Copilot in which tech stack and how often they are. Now, as far as processes, reviews on how to ensure, I mentioned before that the relevance and the integrity of the data that you're feeding Copilot is really important. One handy tip to make sure that the data that you have, for example, in SharePoint Online is relevant, is to use some of the feature sets that's actually included in your M365 Copilot licensing. So if I jump into the SharePoint Admin Center here, you can see that we have this new blade on the side called Advanced Management with this fun little Pro button. As soon as you are licensed for M365 Copilot, this will become available. And when I click in here and go to all features, I'll talk you through a couple of them that I think are really important. Number one being set lifecycle management. A
Hey,
lot of the
Tyler.
clients that I get to, yep,
Sorry, can you zoom in just a little bit on there by chance?
absolutely.
There we go.
That better?
A lot better. Thank you.
No worries. So this site lifecycle management one for SharePoint sites, a lot of the clients that I'm lucky to work with have separate sites for different project initiatives. And when that project is finished, whether that be an annual budget review, that site stays there in perpetuity. And if we're asking Copilot for things around budget summaries, and we have legacy data dating back to the 2010s, for example, that's not going to give us the most relevant information. But if we use the automation tools in advanced SharePoint management to take those legacy sites offline or archive them, we know the data that Copilot's using is the most relevant information. The other one I'd highly recommend looking into is the site level access restriction. That is where you can control who has access to what in your SharePoint tenant. Again, SharePoint Copilot is only using the files that the individual user has access to. So ensuring that your data is set to only allow the users that you want to view things is very important. And then to ensure that this site level access restriction is functioning as intended, that data access governance in your reporting blade is going to be where you can use develop processes to essentially fact check or sanity check the Copilot data in action. Any questions or concerns?
Yeah, I
I
think
know
the
we
only
went pretty
thing,
quick there.
yeah, right. Tyler is great content. So I've been kind of answering the chat questions in the background here. I know that Sean had one that was really regarding for confidential information. I know that there's like these different tags, right, that are being incorporated as well then for documents. That's one portion of that, right? That kind of covers that.
Yes, absolutely. There is a whole platform of features available depending on your licensing called sensitivity labels. And you can either manually apply these to documents or, depending on your licensing, have them automatically applied to data based on certain identifiers that you have within the data. For example, if there's personally identifiable information or anything that might be a HIPAA compliance risk, it can automatically tag that with a sensitivity label that will exclude it from Copilot prompts.
Yeah, and then there's
Also,
also
if you
policies around chat, right? That you can have it clean up chat for confidential information. We have that at our org, right?
Absolutely. Anything that's meant to be a transitory record from a Microsoft perspective, so that's chat, emails, etc., you have functionality to essentially omit that or time it out after a certain amount of time to be excluded from Copilot responses. Very important, though, to differentiate between one-to-one Teams chat and Teams chat in a Teams meeting or a Teams channel. Those are intentionally meant to be held so that Copilot can summarize a meeting, for example, or summarize action items within a Teams chat.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then the last one here, just really quickly, is that Thomas had one that I think I can answer just really quickly. Agent-wise, when we configure agents like for BC or F&O, by default, typically it's using that inheritance of the end user, meaning what I type in is my username and it passes that authentication in. But you can configure an agent, like I've done this for a lot of different companies at this point, that you have the agent have a security context related to it. They call it a service principal is really the concept behind it. And then from there, it accesses that information using different security than what the user has. And that's for examples where maybe you have tables of data, for example, in BC that typically you don't want to have them have in the user interface. But for some of the questions that they may want to answer, you may want to be able to surface that in some of the answers as a part of it. So once again, it's a really good it's a nice configuration option that you have to really enable that as part of the process.